Penn State fans, Bob Flounders, Max Ralph here on the last day of March. You know what that means, Max? Tomorrow is April Fool's Day, and
Right.
someone's going to get pranked. Hopefully, it won't be you or I, but I have a feeling we're going to know somebody who got pranked. I hate getting pranked, so why don't we just focus on the last day of March? We've got plenty of Penn State football news to get to. We're doing this on Monday. Ahead of another availability on Tuesday up at Penn State with James Franklin, some assistants, and some players. We'll have more on that later in the week, but it was a pretty, Max, it was a pretty eventful weekend starting on Friday with Penn State's Pro Day. There was about a dozen or so former Lions in attendance. Not all of them worked out. There's some recruiting news, but Max, I think there was a little news drop on Sunday about the blue-white game and maybe some details about where fans can expect to sit and not sit as the Beaver Stadium renovation, all $700 million of it, continues. So why don't we just start with that? The game will not be on TV, but if you want to watch it in person, you might not be able to sit where you want to sit.
That's right. Well, let's start out with I think it's perfect that we're supposed to have a Penn State football practice viewing session on April Fool's Day, because if anybody's getting pranked or formulating pranks, I could really see James Franklin trying to pull one on the media. So
Yeah.
I'm going to keep my eyes peeled tomorrow. I'm just it'll all be in good fun, I'm sure, but I'm anticipating something will happen.
He likes to play with the media. He was doing it again, I think, at the spring his kickoff press conference. He was messing with some people in their hair and stuff like that. So yeah, if he gets a chance and he's in a good mood, something's going down. So everyone be prepared for a James Franklin prank. I know we are.
That's right. Yeah, if he's in a good mood, if he gets good practices for the next few weeks, he'll definitely be playful, I think. But let's talk about the blue-white game. You're right, Bob. There was a little bit of news over the weekend. It shouldn't really be a surprise to anybody, but the west side of the stadium is completely knocked out for the blue-white game. You know, obviously there was the big demolition with the press box and some of the upper-level seating over there. Nobody's sitting on that side of the stadium, but north, south, and east are all still going to be good to go for the stadium, but also gates on the west side, which, if I'm thinking correctly, would be C, D, C, and maybe E as well. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Okay.
But all the two gates on the east side, which are A and B, I'm pretty sure. You can check my story on PennLive if I got that wrong. But I'm pretty sure it's A and B are the ones that are going to be available for entry at the blue-white game. And yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a good crowd, you know, considering there's quite a bit of hype around this year's team. But it's going to look a little bit weird with half the stadium completely empty. And of course, I still think it's weird driving past it, Bob, seeing the west side completely gone.
Yeah, it's going to take some getting used to. This is a 3-year renovation, so there's going to be a lot of twists and turns. Max, I'm just wondering about the future of the blue-white game. I sense that if it were really just up to James, and it was just James' call, I don't know how many more we were actually going to have, but he keeps talking about how important it is to the community, and there's a lot of events tied to it. So I think he is reluctantly pressing forward. It's going to probably be a lot shorter. There's not going to be halftime. He doesn't want the fans. He doesn't want the fans to check out and head into the parking lot when the 14's in. So I think what I would say is, Penn State fans, if you were really big fans of the blue-white game, you might want to get to the one this year. I don't know how many more there'll be after this, but it is really nothing more than just really the final workout or final practice usually for James and his team. And, you know, the hay is in the barn by then, and it's kind of really, it's not what it was 20 years ago, Max, but right. I think the heavy lifting is being done on the practice field prior to the blue-white game. Penn State's got to find some answers at some positions, but you know, one of the reasons why they do, Max, is because of who we saw at Pro Day, right? Mm-hmm. They got to find some options in the passing game because Tyler Warren was at pro day. They got to find some edge rushers, some young edge rushers to step up because Abdul Carter was at the pro day, and we were both up there. It went by pretty fast. About a dozen guys worked out. Jalen Kimber ran very well, but we talked about that kind of on a video. It's just weird seeing Penn State have question marks at tight end, at edge rusher, because, once you get past Deni Dennis Sutton, they like their talent, Max, but, until you actually see it, there's going to be some uncertainty.
Yeah, you hit the big ones. Pass catcher and defensive end are the positions that I would say us as a collective media beat unit during our practice viewing sessions over the next month or where we're looking. Last week, all eyes were trained on Devontae Ross and Kyron Hudson and the young pass catchers, and we saw pretty good stuff. Johnny and I talked about that pretty in depth on last week's podcast. And the edge rushers, it's interesting. Max Granville's near the top of that list, and so is Zariah Fisher. And neither one of those guys have really played a whole lot. I mean, Zariah's been here for a long time. He's an old guy to be playing college football, but he's been hurt so much that he's not a known commodity right now. We don't know what he can bring. So I think that those positions are big. And also, linebacker, I think, is the other huge one, which plays into, as you said, another spot that was at pro day, a guy we saw, Kobe King's gone. Could have come back, maybe a little bit of surprise that he left, but, dealing with another new defensive coordinator, and, can't blame him. And I think he's done pretty well for himself in the pre-draft process as well. He's going to end up in the middle rounds and definitely get a chance to stick in the NFL. So, those are the three positions. But Bob, the pro day was thankfully pretty quick. you hit it. You hit the nail on the head. That can usually be a pretty long and tedious day, but I thought they were efficient on Friday.
Yeah, and I think it helped. It wasn't as crowded as I thought it would be because the news leaked that Abdul, I think, that kind of became known that he wasn't going to do anything. And I think Tyler Warren. I mean, I think that if those guys, I think if the league knew those guys were going to do some things, I think it might have been a little bit more crowded. There were representatives from all the teams there, but there were no heavy hitters there. One thing I wanted to circle back to with you, because you were up at the practice availability last week, and some of the social media clips of Penn State players kind of going through their paces during the practice. It's pretty clear to me that Luke Reynolds has reshaped his body.
Yeah.
In year two, I think when he first got to Penn State, January enrollee ahead of the 2024 season, he might have been 225 pounds. He's a little bit bigger than that. And looking at him run routes and just watching people kind of struggle to stay with him, he looks like already he's going to be a matchup problem in the fall because he's added weight and he can make the contested catch. He can use his body as a shield. It looks like his lower half has filled out too. He really looks the part of a Big Ten tight end now. And I think even Tyler Warren said, on Friday that he all but said it, like they have a couple of options at tight end, but I don't think it's going to be very long until Luke establishes himself as one of the premier options in the passing game. And he's going to be effective as a blocker in the run game.
Yeah, I think Penn State fans should feel really lucky to have 2 more years of Luke Reynolds.
Yeah.
But I'm going to just make my prediction right now. I think it's only going to be 2 more years because, you're absolutely right. I noticed it right when we got out to practice last week. I wrote about it in my my practice takeaways. Like, he really does look big. And a big storyline for him all of last year was how quickly he put on weight. But you can tell through winter workouts, like, it's less about just the pure weight now. His body looks more polished. Like, he's ready to be a number 1 Big Ten tight end. I'm curious to see how he blocks this year. Obviously, that's a big step. And I feel a little bit bad for Khalil Dinkins, who is a talented player, but kind of remains in the shadow of a better tight end in front of him for his whole career. But Luke Reynolds looks the part. He was really impressive in the one-on-ones that we saw. Like, he was getting mugged and was still coming down with the ball. I think you're going to see a lot of that this fall. Really impressive player. Excited to see what he can do. But yeah, like I said, I'm going to make my prediction right now, plant my flag. I think it's not a bold one, but you're only getting 2 more years of Luke Reynolds.
3 and out for Luke. You heard it from Max Ralph.
Yeah.
I won't disagree with you, especially if he does when the fans get to see him in uniform this year. You're going to be like, well, he didn't look like that last year, so it's going to be he's going to be needed too. So Penn State's still working some things out there in the packing. What I was going to ask you about the pro day. We talked about it in the video. So Drew threw, but he only threw to Julian Fleming, I think. I think he was just, he was there to throw. But, it was pretty obvious that everyone was kind of checking him out. And he looks, whenever he gets to just throw the ball, right, and just cut it loose, no pass rush, he can really let it rip. And, I think a year from now, when he is ready for the 2026 draft, the question's going to be, how much can he improve his stock in his final season? But there's just no questioning his arm strength. He can certainly sling it, and I think more than a few NFL teams were taking notes on Friday. Even though I think Julian Fleming ran a 4.7. So I don't know how much you read into that, but if Drew gets a chance to throw it to some quicker guys, I think that's going to be must watch, must see theater.
Yeah, Drew, like I said it when we did our short recap video, Bob, but if there's anything Drew does well, it's purely throw the ball. Like when you give him a chance to set up with both feet, just throw it around in an indoor on-air environment, like he is going to wow some people. I mean, you see it when he's playing on Saturdays. Like he is extremely talented. It's never been the question for him. It's the accuracy, decision-making type stuff that he's still got to show this fall. But I will say, like, to look into the crystal ball again and talk about next year, we're learning right now in this draft class just how desperate a lot of NFL teams are for quarterbacks. Like, the guys who are going out this year really weren't that impressive in college. I mean, Cam Ward put up big numbers, but tons of turnovers. Shedeur Sanders, doesn't necessarily have the athleticism, played at maybe a little bit of a lower level with a Colorado team that, wasn't great. They were fine. They weren't awesome. But those two guys are probably going to go in the top 10. Like, teams are desperate for quarterbacks. And so when you get into, like, after next year, after the season's done, when you get into Drew getting a chance to impress teams with pro days, with combine workouts, like, he's going to skyrocket. Like, he just is, because to a certain extent, NFL teams start to care a lot less about what they've seen on the field with toolsy quarterbacks like Drew Allar. Like, he's gonna skyrocket, and teams already got a glimpse this weekend. Those pro days are like a sneaky way to get a guy like Drew in front of NFL personnel, as much as they can, and he's gonna be talked about a lot. He's definitely gonna. Here's my prediction: he's gonna end up with a better draft spot than what his play might suggest. And if he plays well enough to be like a top 10 pick, then you can just disregard that. But if he doesn't, I think he's still probably going to end up in the first round just because of who he is as a player and as an athlete.
Talking about Penn State football, the pro day, we're going to get to some recruiting. We already talked about the makeshift blue-white game as the stadium continues to be renovated. Just a couple more pro day thoughts there, Max. I think two of the more interesting players, I'm not sure that they'll both be drafted. I think they both should be. Jalen Reed is going to get drafted. The guy that I'm talking about is Jalen Kimber, who ran sub 4.4. I think he ran 4.3 and change. Mm-hmm. At the pro day, he's got the size. We talked about it in the video, but I do think when you're that big and you can cover, I'd be really surprised if he doesn't find a home in the draft. I don't think he's a free agent anymore now that he showed what he can do. Mm-hmm. As somebody who can move at that size. But I think Jalen Reed is also interesting to me, Max, because he talked about it afterward. He's playing the disrespect card, and I just don't know if there's how much truth there is to that. I think he says that just to get himself fired up, but I do think the NFL is aware of him. I think they've always been aware of him, and he talked about talking to teams and going on visits, the 30 visits he's going to go on. And he talked about, the more that he talked to the teams, the more he was like, well, they kind of really do know who I am and what I can do. I'm like, well, yeah, I think they always did. I think I don't want to say it's a figment of his imagination because that'll just get him fired up. But I do think he is a valued player. He talked about the fact he can play nickel, he can play free, he can play strong, and that's not every safety can do that in the draft class. He ran 4.49, so he can run. He had a productive final season, much like Jair Brown did in his final season. I think I think you could see Jalen Reed finding a home round 4, maybe round 3, somewhere in there, maybe even round 5. It's just hard to see, the team and the needs and all that. But a versatile safety is an important position. I'm not sure where he's going, but he's definitely going to get drafted. And the league, I think, has always known about him.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think a lot of where it comes from for Jalen is like college media and awards and stuff. Like last fall, he was PO'd that he was not in the conversation for first team All Big Ten and defensive back of the year. I mean, I have no qualms with Caleb Downs winning safety of the year. I think Jahdae Barron was up there too from Texas. Those are two really stinking good defensive backs. But I mean, Jalen has a point. When you look at the pure numbers, he was up there. I think he had, I want to say at the time that the watch list came out, he had the most tackles in the nation. I could be wrong on that, but he had a fair argument. But I also think that you're right. I think part of it is he's finding any way he can to motivate himself, and more power to him because it's turned him into a damn good football player. So I think round 3 or 4 is the right range for him too. When we talked to him at the combine, he told us that teams were projecting him in between the 2nd and 4th rounds. I'd be really surprised if he went in the 2nd round. I mean, it kind of took me aback to hear that he had gotten those grades from teams. And yeah, I think 3rd or 4th is a good guess. And I'm with you on Kimber. I think he could be a 6th or 7th round selection pretty easily. He told us teams needed to see him run well. He did. And so I don't really see any reason for them to not have interest in him. I mean, he played pretty well in his lone season at Penn State. So,
yep, I agree. So let's move on, Max, here on the Blue-White Breakdown and just talk a little recruiting. We'll close with that. I think there was some news over the weekend. I think there were some players on campus, and I think that Penn State, the recruiting game never stops. It's always ongoing. I don't know what class they're targeting now, but I think I saw Johnny McGonigal had a story that I think an 8th grader had recently received an offer from Penn State. They identify him young. They get a look at him at camps, and Penn State is as good as anyone, I think, at finding players they think will be good before maybe some other schools. But I do know there was some news. I think Stan Drayton, the new running backs coach, had some work to do with some players at the position he's going to recruit now that Ja'Juan Seider is at Notre Dame, and it sounds like things went pretty well. What say you?
Yeah, so Messiah Mickens from Harrisburg. I'm sure a lot of our readers and listeners are very familiar with his name. And then Kemon Spell from McKeesport, both really high-level running backs. I mean, Messiah was the Gatorade Player of the Year in Pennsylvania last year. Kemon Spell is going to end up being probably the number 2 prospect in Pennsylvania at the end of his recruiting cycle in 2027. But that's only because Maxwell Hiller, the offensive lineman that Johnny wrote about for this morning, is going to be the only guy who's ahead of him. But Spell is a really good running back who's, still just a sophomore. Those 2 guys were really close with Ja'Juan Seider. I mean, when he left, it was well documented how good of a recruiter Seider was. I mean, there's a big reason why guys like Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, Journey Brown, why those guys had so much success and loved their time at Penn State because of Ja'Juan Seider, and why Penn State did so well on the recruiting trail at the position. But he's gone now, and I think there was legitimate and warranted concern from fans when he left that maybe the recruiting at the position could take a hit because of Spell and Mickens being committed and being so close to him. But those 2 got back on campus this weekend. They got to meet with Drayton for the first time, and they both shut down their recruitments moving forward. Mickens was supposed to take an OV to 3 or 4 different places this summer, including Notre Dame with Sider. He's not doing it right now. I'm never going to say never. Like things can always change, but for now, he's locked down again. He's canceled his visits. Kemon Spell is still 2 years out from taking OVs, but he claims his recruitment is shut down. He's an in-state guy who clearly has a lot of love for Penn State. So I would say the bottom line is the running back room is in great hands moving forward.
Yeah, and it really needs to be too, because the two headliners in 2025 are this is the last year we'll see Nick and Katron.
That's right.
2,000-yard rushers. Interesting to see how the number 3 running back job plays out. But they have some running backs they really like. But you're talking about the future, and you can't stop. You can't stop recruiting. James Franklin won't stop recruiting. One more thing to get to. I think it's a little bit under the radar. I don't know if Penn State fans are aware, but so Frank Leonard is no longer, kind of working with Penn State's offensive line.
Yeah.
He, I believe, announced his retirement. I think he was a pretty important piece to O-line development. I think, he kind of was brought in a few years ago. I think he was living with James Franklin at his house, but important. I think an important guy, and it kind of was. The timing was a little curious, but it is what it is. He's not the youngest guy in the world, but I think he really helped Penn State and the offensive line, working with Phil Troutwine, and I think he's going to be missed a little bit. But I don't know how you feel about it. But when James talked about him at times, I think he realized his value, and I'm just curious if this is maybe a bigger loss than people realize.
I'm with you. I think it is a big loss. James was really close with Frank Leonard. Like you said, they lived together. Like Frank lived in James's house for I don't know how long. He might have still been living with him through last year. I'm not positive on that. But they were close. He was a confidant for James. And he was really important for Phil Troutwine because, those two had some history at Boston College in the past. James and Frank crossed paths at Kansas State. Like, it was so noticeable when we were at practice last Tuesday. I didn't really necessarily put it together right away, but things were a lot quieter, a little more calm, more like workmanlike while we were at practice. And then I realized, like a couple of days later, when the news came out that he was retiring, like it was quiet because Frank wasn't there anymore. Like if you were ever out at practice, you knew he was there. He was the loudest guy on the field. If you're at the practice fields outside of Holuba and Lash, like you could be all the way in one corner and he's down in the other one with the offensive line and you can still hear him yelling. Like he was a really good motivator. He was really important for the offensive line's development. And I think that his presence is definitely going to be missed. I'm curious to see like how Penn State makes up for that because Phil Troutwine is not that kind of coach. Like he's a more quiet, reserved guy. Like he's a great offensive line coach. Don't get me wrong. There's a reason Penn State's O-line recruiting is taking a huge step. There's a reason their play is taking a huge step. But he's not what Frank Leonard is as a coach. And I do think it's important to have both sides of that coin when you're coaching an offensive line, especially.
I agree. I put it this way, and I think, see if you agree, Max. Phil Troutwine was the good cop. Frank Leonard was the bad cop.
Yep.
When it was time, carrot and stick, right? When it was time to get after somebody, more often than not, I bet you it was Frank that was getting after some people, whether it was game day or on the practice field. But a valuable guy, and I think that a contrast in style. So we'll see how that plays out. Because I will say, Penn State's offensive line last year certainly responded. Whether it was part of it was Andy Kotelnicki, but that offensive line definitely got better as the year went on. They had some moving parts that came of age last year, including the center, Nick Dawkins. So we'll see. We'll see if he's missed. I have a funny feeling he might be because you need that guy. You need a couple of those guys on your staff that are not afraid to put people in their place, tell them it's not good enough, and get after people. So Frank will probably be missed, James Franklin's old roommate, but we'll see how it goes. It's a lot quieter on the practice field. You noticed it. So Max, any other thoughts here on the blue-white breakdown?
Yeah, Bob, there is one more recruiting thing that we need to hit on.
Sure.
The 2 running backs who are already committed sticking around was really big news, but potentially bigger news, which is hard to say with how big that was. 2027 wide receiver Khalil Taylor committed to Penn State. And like everything that I've read and heard about this kid is that he's probably going to be a 5-star by the time he's done. He's from Seton-LaSalle over in Pittsburgh. Obviously got 2 more years until he signs. So you can bet that Penn State's going to have to battle to keep his services. But getting this early commitment is a big deal. It is a massive confidence booster, I think, from the fan base in receivers coach Marcus Hagans. But you also have to give credit where it's due to Terry Smith, because he has just crushed the whippeal in the Pittsburgh area over the past, 15 years now. It is just, it's kind of hard to state how big of a recruiting win this is for Penn State right now, considering the state of the receiver room and just the caliber of player that this guy is. You can think about the best receivers to come out of Penn State over the past 6 years, even over the last year with Lex Cyrus. They've struggled to keep him home. And, Penn State has the big one right now. I mean, that is a big fish to keep at Penn State and in Pennsylvania. Like I said, 2 years until he signs the papers. This one's going to be, you're going to be hearing about him a lot between now and then. But it's a great start for Penn State, and this 2027 class could really be special.
Yeah, Max. The last you mentioned the magic number 5 is in 5-star. I'm just going to say this, and it's a completely different. I just remember the last 5-star I think Penn State signed was Justin Shorter, a wide receiver from New Jersey. There was a lot of excitement about him, and they still got to do it. It didn't quite work out. I think he finished his career at Florida, but everyone's different, and they need to upgrade their receiving room, and hopefully this guy can deliver on his promise. But I just remember the last 5-star did not quite work out. I think he was in Micah Parsons' class, the 2018 class, I think it was. But anyway, that's ancient history now. So hopefully this guy is as good as they think he can be. And you're right to give. I think Marcus Hagans needed to get somebody on board, but also Terry Smith had to have been involved. And it is amazing. Terry's reach in Western PA really is amazing. And he has got, I don't know that there is a more valuable assistant on James's staff than Terry Smith, the former wideout captain on the 91 team.
Yeah. I think it'd be hard to say if there are more valuable assistants in college football than Terry, which I know is a big statement, but as a guy who's been by James's side for forever, he and the work that he does recruiting, and I mean, you could even expand. We could have a whole 40-minute podcast about Terry Smith alone, I think. But the increase in draftable players at corner for Penn State over the past few years too. Like Terry's fingerprints are all over that. He's a big deal and seems to have helped reel in one of the biggest recruiting wins of recent memory for Penn State.
All right, Penn State fans, that's it for this episode of the Blue-White Breakdown. There's availability later in the week for Penn State. We'll be getting to that. Lots of stories on PennLive. Max Ralph, Bob Flounders, Johnny McGonigal, will be involved as well. So good chatting with you guys, and we'll be back later this week with more Blue-White Breakdown podcasts.